Coming to you live from It's Always Sunny in Seattle studios, this is Open Mic, a podcast about art, inequality, and the troubles of 2024 America. I am your host, Mike. Before we get started with our interview episode, an announcement. Tears for Gaza is doing amazing. It's a selected 25 poems that I wrote from October 2023 to about the middle of February 2024. It touches on themes of loss, war, the fragile nature of our democracy, the rising popularity of fascism in our world, and, of course, a hunger for peace in our time. And it's available to you absolutely free. If you go to my threads and you scroll up, you'll see all but about 2 that I wrote specifically for the book. If scrolling up doesn't sound nice to you, well, the scientists here at Raw Plus Seattle have come up with a solution for you. You'll find a link to the Apple book in the show notes. I'll go ahead and read you a poem from it, and we'll get right in today's interview with Shelley Jinks Johnson. Vicious. When they bomb a hospital, they don't replace it. When they enter homes, send a soldier to deface it. When they bomb a school, kill the children, kill the teacher. When they bomb a church, they kill the parish and the preacher. Governmental killers, they aim for all reporters, until there's no one left to document their vicious slaughter. Shelley, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. Give us your name, pronouns, and any handles you go by online.
Hi, yes, I'm Shelley Jinks Johnson. Thank you for having me. My pronouns are she and her. And online, you can find me Pretty Little Widow.
Can you tell us a little bit about your poetry book?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So Pretty Little Widow comes from, as you mentioned, the poetry collection that I published last year. That title comes from a poem within the book. So that's what the book is titled after. I started using that handle a while before I even wrote the first poem for that. So it's been with me for a little while, but it all came together when the poem came out and then the poetry collection formed, and I titled the book that way. And it has become a pretty recognizable, moniker for myself. So I've stuck with it.
Yeah, it's kind of poetic in its delivery too. How long have you been writing?
Not that long, actually. I've been a voracious reader all of my life. I've been a poetry fan all of my life, but I never wrote poetry. And it's been a winding journey that has kind of led me to this place where I find myself, where I am a published author and poet, which is something still kind of strange to me. I began writing poetry about 5 years ago, and that process came out of my husband was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is a very rare, aggressive, terminal form of brain cancer. It really took us by surprise. He was very healthy by all accounts, very active. We led a very active lifestyle. We were big runners. His diagnosis of a brain tumor and then brain cancer really came out of the blue, flipped our worlds upside down. And in the process of dealing with this new life and his terminal illness, I began writing to process. Everything was just crazy at the time. I didn't know what was up, what was down. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. I had been running my own business for a while. It was on this upward trajectory. And I just basically dropped everything to become a full-time caretaker to my husband. And in that process of realizing that very little is in our control, right? Things happen to us, life takes a hard right turn, and you're left wondering what you're supposed to be doing, trying to get a handle on those things and find something that I could control and use to make sense of my world. That became writing. Somewhere along the way, it became poetry. I tell people often that writing saved my life. Poetry saved my life. And that is in no way an overstatement. it became something that I could hold on to, that I could use, that even after, so my husband then passed away in October of 2019. I really needed something that could keep me from drowning and going under the weight of this horrible grief from this tremendous loss that I had experienced. And writing and poetry in particular became that for me.
What is the writing process for you like? Would you say that you start with a phrase, or how do you begin your poetry?
In the early days when I began writing, it was all emotion, right? I had this chaotic turmoil within me. And so it became a compulsion in the beginning where I felt like I was vomiting emotions onto the page, right? Because I didn't have anything else to do with them. And that was a place that I could be honest. I could let them out without being judged or thinking that anyone was going to see it or read it. And when I began committing to writing as a practice, as a craft, that morphed. And so now it is much more of a discipline. It isn't just a reaction to strong emotions, it became a discipline. And so my writing process now is, I try to pay attention to the world around me. I try to value the time that I have, the interactions that I have with people. I walk every day. I'm very active. I have a dog. I walk him from my house to a trail. We do at least 3 miles every day. And usually that is when my creative juices are flowing the best, when I'm just out, not trying to force anything. I'm out in nature. I'm letting my body do what it's supposed to do, and the ideas come. And so I probably look like the neighborhood crazy person because usually I will take a few steps and then I'll stop and I'll pull out my phone and I'll write something really fast, and then we'll go another half mile and I'll have another idea and I'll log it into my phone. So I'm very thankful for the notes app on my phone. It's full of stuff. I'll have this, a brain flash of a phrase that jumps out at me or a scene that has played out in front of me as I was walking, and I'll make a note of that. And usually by the time I get home, I have a few snippets of something. And then I will sit at my desk and longhand write, extending out those ideas, and sometimes those take poetic form immediately. Sometimes it's not until I go back and I put it into my computer and I start working through the editing process that I'm able to make something. One of the points that I'd like to make is that in 2020, I started sharing my poetry with other people, which is something that I thought I would never do. I was writing initially for myself. So I was being very raw and very honest in the things I was putting down on paper. When I started sharing with other people and getting some good quality feedback, I then began a writing group. I sought out other poets who were doing similar things to what I wanted to be doing. So we formed a group and we started meeting in January of 21. And that more than anything is why I have a poetry collection today, because what that did was force me to be accountable to my writing. And so there were plenty of times when I was, because I'm a creative and I'm a procrastinator by nature. It is hardwired in my system. So there were many times that it was Friday night before we were going to be meeting on Saturday, and I was thinking, oh no, no, I have to write something. I have to write something. I have all these disjointed phrases and words, and I have to form them into something. And so it was having that accountability that really forced me to create a craft of writing. And I think creating that discipline was key in getting to the point where I did have a collection to be able to put together and then publish.
And do you feel like having those deadlines? You said you started that writing group. Do you think having those deadlines pushed you to being a better artist?
Most definitely. That the deadline, the accountability, and actually making myself vulnerable enough to put my work in front of others and say, please critique me. Please edit what I've written. Give me your honest feedback. And that helped me improve my craft.
Let's talk a little bit more about Pretty Little Widow. You said initially when you were writing it, you didn't necessarily have an intention for release. What was that feeling like when you made your first sale?
Oh my gosh, I have to tell you, even before the first sale, when I got the actual book, the proof in my hands, the I always say the real life book, the actual paperback book in my hands, I cried. And I knew it was an emotional thing. I knew I was going to, be happy and excited, but I did not expect the level of emotion. And when I got it, this flood of everything just washed over me. Everything that it took of me putting into the book, everything it took to actually format it and get it published, all of the everything. Holding that book, it felt like I was holding an era of my life in my hands, and it was overwhelming. So there was that. And then when I made the first sale, I thought, really? Like people want to buy this? People want to read this? And coming to the realization that other people would find value in the work was incredibly satisfying.
Since its release, have you done any live poetry readings?
Yes, yes, I have. I've also started a community group here in my town where we do open mic nights. We have a wonderful and supportive local coffee shop in our downtown area. And every time I go to the owner, who's a friend, and I say, it's time for poetry, and she says, absolutely, just tell me when, let's do it. Those have been incredibly popular and growing in popularity, which is encouraging because we get to see the growth of the popularity of poetry in particular in our area. And that's been exciting. So I just hosted the last one last Thursday night. I had over 20 people sign up to share their work on the mic. And that's the most we'd ever had actually brave enough to get up and share. And so it's encouraging to see that grow in our community as well.
Oh, nice. So it's kind of been a light for the community. When you first started doing poetry readings at that coffee shop, when it began, was it just you, or were there other poets in your town you collaborated with?
There were four of us. There were four. We said, we're going to do this poetry night, see how it goes, and see if anybody shows up. And so there were four of us that committed to get up and read. And it was my first time to share my work publicly, which was utterly terrifying. So we had four poets, myself included. We shared, and we packed out the house that first night with people from the community coming to listen, which was incredibly encouraging. And that was in 21. So I think that it was proof that people were ready to get out of isolation. They were tired of the pandemic. They were tired of not having community events to go to. They saw this as an opportunity and they came out, which was surprising because you're a poet. You know that when you bring up poetry, most people will roll their eyes and say, oh, I don't like poetry. There's often that response because oftentimes most people's experience or exposure to poetry was when they were in school and it was something boring that they didn't understand, and so they didn't connect to it, and they still carry that idea of poetry with them. I'm on a mission to change that with everyone that I meet. But it was really encouraging and surprising that our first event drew so many people from the community for poetry.
One thing I do want to ask you about, because I haven't read my poetry book live, so kudos. I'm snapping right now. Describe to us that feeling. What was the first poem that you read live?
Yes, the first poem that I read live was a piece that is very vulnerable for me because it is talking about, it's called Atomic Theory, and it's one of the first ones in my book. And it's talking about the instance when my husband's doctor sent us home on hospice, basically. And so we know that we are going home and he is actively dying. And this was one of the first truly honest things that I had ever written. And I was terrified to read it in front of a group of people. And also because it has the word fuck in it. And I was a little, you know, I have a pretty loose mouth, but not in this general public, right? And so that was another layer that I was going to be exposing myself because I was just really going to lay it bare for everyone. And I really had to get to a point with my writing and then with my ability to be able to use my voice out loud with my poetry. I had to get to a point of accepting that my voice and my story are mine. They're my truth. And if it offends you, I can't take that on. If you don't like it, I can't take that on. I don't have control of that. I only have control of myself. And I am not going to muzzle myself. I'm not going to make my story or my feelings about my story small to make you feel comfortable. That was a commitment I had to make to myself when I started out on this journey. I was terrified of sharing my poetry in the beginning. And it was a process of me coming to this point where I could say, but my story and my voice is mine to share. And if someone doesn't like it, that's their problem to deal with. And I don't say that from, I try to be a kind person. I try to be empathetic and compassionate. It's the tenet from which I try to live my life. I don't say that to be abrasive or shocking or unkind to someone. I say it out of self-respect for me and my story. And I just believe strongly what I have to say is valid. And I've come to believe that it is valuable to other people. That doesn't mean that it's valuable to everyone. It does not mean that everyone is going to love me or like what I have to say. And that's okay.
Yeah, you kind of had to make that space for your truth.
Yes.
That's a tremendous amount of bravery. Let's talk about your next book too, because that one's coming soon.
Yes.
What's it called and what's it about?
Oh, I'm excited. It is called North Star. It's my first children's book. It's about finding your inner light and learning to shine and learning to share it with others. And so it's a story that I hope will instill in everyone who reads it, but especially young children. Even in dark times, you have something special to offer the world. Find it and celebrate it and share it with others, and then help others to find theirs and learn to shine. So it's a very positive message. It launches tomorrow, March 1st. It's going to be available on all Amazon platforms. So I'm really excited to roll it out.
Yeah, and that it's a kid's book is particularly interesting. Is this a poetry book as well?
It is. So it's a story told in poetry form. I actually wrote this as a standalone poem about a year ago. I had some good feedback from several different people, and I had a couple of composers who were really interested in trying to turn it into a song. And so we kind of went back and forth, and I wasn't feeling anything. And I sat on it for a while, I put it away, and I pulled it back out and thought, this isn't a song. This really wants to be a children's story. I think this is a story that everyone needs to hear. And so I started formatting it out and what would it look like as a picture book. I approached a good friend of mine who is a watercolor artist. I'm a big fan of his work. So I went to him and I said, Jerry, I have this idea. This is what I'm thinking. And he took it, ran with it, and he started sending me some of the sketches that he was doing. And I thought, you've just crawled into my head and drawn out everything that I imagined. So we entered into this wonderful collaboration, and this is the brainchild of that collaboration.
A little bit more about the illustrative aspect too, because I saw the cover to it and it's absolutely beautiful. Tell us a little bit about that process of collaborating with a watercolor artist.
I love creative collaborations. I think, I was listening to some of your other episodes and you were talking about collaboration versus competition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about that. I believe that creativity begets creativity. And so anytime you engage in some form of art, whether you're just looking at and admiring a painting, or you are having a reaction to a poem that you're reading, or you are falling in love with characters from a novel, that interaction starts the creative process. And if you are a creative, it usually sparks some kind of inspiration for some other piece of work, right? And so the collaboration with Jerry with his art was so fun because we would go verse by verse with the storyline and we talk about all of these ideas of what visually it could be. And then he would come up with his interpretation of the things that I was telling him. And we just had this wonderful back and forth. It was such a fun process to go through because, he was working in a medium and an element that I don't work with, and he's not a writer. So the way that we traded off with our own skill sets and was able to come up with a product in the end was incredibly satisfying to see and to be a part of.
Excellent. And I'm guessing you've already seen your proofs of the final printout of it, but what are your thoughts? How do they translate to the print medium?
They worked very well. I was surprised because I was a little worried. My first book, I self-published. So I self-published Pretty Little Widow, and I have self-published this children's book. The poetry collection obviously is just black and white. So I did not know what to expect with a full color layout. And when I got that proof in, I was so pleased. The colors are vibrant. The sketches or the art, because it is watercolor. So they're a little sketchy, which is the look that I was going for this particular book. They all came out incredibly well, very vibrant. I'm really happy with the final product.
I guess finally, a message to other artists out there. These could be artists in your community. This could be a poet. This could be a young kid at home with his Shel Silverstein book or with your book in their hands. What's a creative piece of advice you would offer somebody in their craft?
Keep creating. If you have an idea, do it. I think we tend to hold ourselves back because we think, well, I'm not any good at that. Or if I do it, it's not going to be how I imagine it. And the only way you are going to get to the point where you want your work to be is in the doing. So keep at it, keep doing it. Do it because you love it. Creativity is something that feeds the soul. Don't do it because you think you're going to make money at it, or you're not going to do it because you think you can't make money at it. The act of creating is something that we have, that we can give to the world as a gift from ourselves. And so it is very worth doing. And so that's my biggest advice is just make the thing. Write the thing, keep drawing, keep painting, keep learning, keep creating, because the world needs it. I know I need it. Even if no one else was reading my poetry, I would still write because I have to write for myself.
And that was Shelley Jinks Johnson. You'll find links to all her socials and her website in the show notes. I highly suggest you follow them. Her poetry is uniquely moving, honest, and her new book, North Star, just released. It's a lovely, positive message for all ages. The art inside is whimsical and inspiring. Definitely check it out. Until next week, be progressive and stay creative.